The tomatoes were perfectly ripe, their red skin gleaming under the Saturday morning sun at the downtown farmer's market. I picked up 3 of them, feeling their weight in my palm when I heard it, that laugh, the same melodic laugh that had echoed through our kitchen for 34 years of marriage. My heart stopped. I turned slowly, afraid to look, afraid not to look. There she was, not 20 feet away, examining a display of fresh herbs. Same auburn hair with the silver streak she'd always refused to dye. Same way of tilting her head when concentrating. Same delicate hands that had once worn my grandmother's wedding ring. Miranda, my wife, who had been officially declared gone 6 months ago. "That'll be $4.50 for the tomatoes, sir." The vendor's voice seemed to come from underwater. I fumbled for my wallet, never taking my eyes off the woman who couldn't possibly be there. She was talking to the herb seller now, and I caught fragments of her voice carried on the morning breeze. The same slight southern accent she'd never quite lost after moving north. The same way she said "wonderful," with that little uptick at the end. My hand shook as I handed over a $5 bill. The vendor gave me a concerned look, but I was already moving, weaving between other shoppers, trying to get closer without being seen. She wore a light blue sundress I'd never seen before, but everything else was achingly familiar. The way she stood with most of her weight on her left foot, the habit of tucking her hair behind her right ear when thinking. And when she reached for her purse to pay for the herbs, I saw it clearly, the crescent-shaped scar on the back of her left hand from when she'd fallen off her bike as a child. This wasn't someone who looked like Miranda. This was Miranda, but Miranda was gone. I held the official certificate. I had attended her memorial service. I had stood in the rain and watched as they lowered her casket into the ground at Riverside Cemetery. The woman, Miranda, finished her purchase and began walking toward the market's exit. Without thinking, I followed, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to keep her in sight. She moved with the same purposeful stride I remembered, the same slight favor of her right leg where she'd broken it years ago. She led me 6 blocks through downtown, past the library where we'd had our first date, past the coffee shop where she'd told me she was pregnant with Zoe. My chest tightened with each familiar landmark, each step that confirmed what my mind refused to accept. Finally, she turned into the entrance of Maple Grove Apartments, a modest complex I'd driven past hundreds of times but never really noticed. I watched from across the street as she climbed to the 2nd floor and disappeared into apartment 2B. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, staring at that door. A few residents came and went, giving me curious glances, but I couldn't move. My engineering mind, trained for 40 years to deal in facts and measurements, struggled to process what I'd witnessed. When I finally made it home, I went straight to my study and pulled out the manila folder I'd labeled Miranda Final Documents. The official certificate was right on top, signed by Dr. Richardson at Mercy General Hospital. Cause listed, complications from pneumonia. Date, March 15th, 2024. I spread the papers across my desk, insurance forms, receipts from the memorial arrangements, sympathy cards from friends and neighbors. All of it real, all of it confirming that my wife of 34 years had quietly passed away in her sleep after a short illness, and yet I had just seen her buying herbs at the farmer's market. I pulled out our wedding album and flipped to the page with our formal portraits. There was Miranda at 23, glowing in her grandmother's lace dress. The same face I'd seen an hour earlier, only now marked by the years we'd shared. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger, remembering how she'd insisted we take pictures by the old oak tree because the light was perfect. My phone buzzed, a text from our daughter Zoe. "Dad, want to grab lunch tomorrow? I'm worried you're spending too much time alone in that house." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. How do you tell your child that you might have seen her mother again? How do you explain something that makes no logical sense? Instead, I typed back, "Lunch sounds good. How about noon at Antonio's?" I needed time. I needed to understand what I'd actually seen before saying a word to anyone. Zoe was only just beginning to recover from losing her mother. I couldn't drag her back into pain with the possibility of hope built on something that might have been nothing more than grief playing tricks on my mind. But even as I tried to rationalize it away, I knew what I'd seen. The scar on her hand was too specific, too unique. Miranda had gotten it when she was 7 years old, riding her bike down a steep hill in her grandmother's neighborhood. She told me the story on our 3rd date, showing me the mark and laughing about how she'd cried more about the damaged bike than her own injury. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich I didn't want, my mind spinning through possibilities. Mistaken identity seemed most likely, but that scar? Could grief be making me see things that weren't there? Could my subconscious be projecting Miranda's features onto a stranger? The rational part of my mind said yes. The part that had loved Miranda Fielding for 34 years said no. I finished half the sandwich and threw the rest away. Then I did something I hadn't done since the funeral. I called Selene Grady, Miranda's oldest friend, and the only person who might understand what I was going through. "Clarence?" Selene's voice was warm but surprised. "How are you holding up, honey?" I need to ask you something, and I need you not to think I'm losing my mind." A pause. "Okay, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Have you ever seen someone who reminded you so much of Miranda that it took your breath away?" Another pause, longer this time. "Oh, Clarence, are you having those moments where you think you see her? That's completely normal. I thought I saw her at the grocery store just last week, and for a second my heart just—" "No," I interrupted. "I mean someone who looked exactly like her. Everything exactly the same. Honey, grief can play tricks on us. The mind wants so badly to see the person we've lost that sometimes—" "The scar, Selene. The bike scar on her left hand." Silence. "What are you saying, Clarence?" "I'm saying I saw Miranda today at the farmer's market, and she had the scar." I heard Selene take a shaky breath. That's not possible." "I know, but I saw what I saw." "Where did she go? This person who looked like Miranda?" "Maple Grove Apartments, 2B. "Clarence, listen to me. You need to be very careful here. If you start telling people you've seen Miranda alive, if you start following strangers around—" She trailed off. "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" "Because it sounds like a grieving widower who might be having a breakdown. And if Zoe hears about this, if the wrong people hear about this, it could cause a lot of problems." But even as Selene spoke, I was thinking about that laugh, about the way Miranda had examined those herbs, turning them over in her palm the same way she'd done in our garden for 20 years. "Maybe you're right," I said finally. "Maybe I'm seeing things. I think you should talk to someone, Clarence. A counselor, maybe. There's no shame in getting help." After I hung up, I sat in my recliner and stared at the wall where Miranda's favorite painting hung, a watercolor of the lake where we'd honeymooned. She'd bought it from a street artist in Maine, insisting it captured the exact shade of blue she remembered from that perfect week. Selene was probably right. Grief could make people see impossible things. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I was going back to Maple Grove Apartments. I parked across the street from Maple Grove Apartments at 7:30 Sunday morning, armed with a thermos of coffee and a newspaper I had no intention of reading. The parking spot gave me a clear view of the building's entrance and the walkway leading to the second-floor units. At 8:15, she appeared. Miranda, or the woman who looked exactly like Miranda, emerged from apartment 2B wearing jeans and a green sweater I recognized. She'd bought that sweater 3 years ago for Zoe's art show opening, saying the color reminded her of sea glass. I slumped lower in my seat as she descended the stairs, moving with that same slight hesitation on the bottom step that Miranda had developed after her knee surgery. She walked to a silver Honda Civic parked in Space 14, a car I'd never seen before, and drove away. I waited 5 minutes, then walked to the building's entrance. The mailboxes were mounted on the wall next to the main door, each labeled with apartment numbers and resident names. Apartment 2B read M. Parker. M. Parker. Not Miranda Fielding, but close enough to keep the same initials. I walked around the building, noting the layout, the security cameras, the fact that apartment 2B had a small balcony overlooking the parking lot. Everything about the place seemed ordinary, the kind of modest complex where people minded their own business and asked few questions. Back in my car, I called Zoe to confirm our lunch plans, trying to keep my voice normal. "Dad, you sound weird. Are you okay?" "Just tired. I didn't sleep well last night." "Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez about something to help you sleep. Mom always said—" She stopped abruptly. 6 months later, and we still walked into these conversational landmines. "I'll think about it," I said gently. "See you at noon." At Antonio's, Zoe looked beautiful, but tired. At 29, she had Miranda's eyes and my stubborn chin, a combination that had gotten her into trouble as a child and served her well as an artist. "You've been cleaning out Mom's things, haven't you?" she said after we'd ordered. "I can tell. You have that look." "What look?" "Like you've been handling her belongings. It's hard, isn't it, going through everything?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I tell her that I hadn't been going through Miranda's things, but following a woman who might be Miranda herself? "I found something weird the other day," Zoe continued, stirring her soup absently. "I was going through some of Mom's financial papers for the accountant, and there was a bank statement showing a withdrawal after she was gone." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What kind of withdrawal?" $500 from her personal checking account. On March 20th, 5 days after the service. I thought it might be an automatic payment that hadn't been canceled yet. But when I called the bank, they said it was a cash withdrawal made at a downtown ATM. Did you report it? I tried, but they said since the account is in probate and the amount was relatively small, it wasn't worth looking into. Probably just a clerical mistake or a delayed transaction from earlier. Zoe shrugged, but it bothered me. Mom was so careful with money. She would never have left that much cash lying around. My thoughts raced. March 20th was 5 days after the service, 2 days after I'd met with the lawyer about her will. If someone had used Miranda's ATM card after she was gone... Dad, you look pale. I'm fine, just thinking about everything we still need to handle. But I wasn't fine. I kept thinking about how Miranda had always been private about her personal checking account, saying everyone needed a little independence, even in marriage. I'd never questioned it. I trusted her completely. After lunch, I drove straight to the police station and asked to speak with someone about a missing person matter. Officer Dana Keene, a woman in her late 30s with sharp, observant eyes, led me into a small interview room. Mr. Fielding, I reviewed your wife's file before you arrived. The case was closed once the official paperwork was filed. What new information do you have? I took a deep breath. I think I saw my wife yesterday, alive. Her expression stayed neutral, though I noticed a slight tension around her eyes. I see. Can you tell me more about this sighting? I described the farmer's market encounter, the apartment building, the identical scar. As I spoke, she took notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. Mr. Fielding, I understand this is an extremely difficult time. Loss can affect perception, and sometimes... This wasn't confusion, I cut in. This was my wife. Sir, your wife was recorded as having passed from pneumonia at Mercy General Hospital. Dr. Richardson signed the official certificate. You attended the service. What you're suggesting doesn't align with the records. Then explain the ATM withdrawal 5 days later. That caught her attention. What withdrawal? I explained what Zoe had discovered, watching as she wrote more notes. Bank irregularities do happen, especially during the transition period after someone is gone, she said. But I'll flag it for follow-up. She closed her notebook. Mr. Fielding, I need to caution you. If you approach this woman again, follow her, or attempt contact, you could face serious legal trouble. Even if she's my wife? Especially if she isn't, and you believe she is. I've seen situations like this before, and they rarely end well. I left the station frustrated and brushed aside, but also more determined. Her warning was clear, but she hadn't said I couldn't observe from a public place. That evening, I returned to Maple Grove Apartments and parked in the same spot. At 6:30, a silver Honda pulled into space 14. Miranda, there was no other name my mind would accept, stepped out carrying grocery bags. As she climbed the stairs, a man emerged from a black BMW near the building's entrance. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, with graying hair and an expensive suit. He followed her upstairs, and I watched them exchange a few words outside apartment 2B before she let him inside. I wrote down the BMW's license plate number and the time. Whatever was happening here, Miranda wasn't handling it alone. Around 8 o'clock, the man left. I waited until 9:30, but Miranda didn't come back out. Driving home, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. If Miranda had somehow staged her disappearance, an idea so extreme I could barely process it, she would have needed help. Legal help, financial help, the kind of help a man in an expensive suit might provide. But why? Why would Miranda want to disappear from her own life? We'd been happy, hadn't we? Sure, we'd had our problems like any couple married for 34 years, but nothing that would drive her to such extreme measures. Unless there was something I didn't know, something she'd hidden from me. Back home, I went to Miranda's desk in our bedroom and began going through her papers more carefully than I had before. Bank statements, insurance documents, correspondence with her pension fund from the school district where she'd worked as a librarian for 25 years. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found something I'd overlooked during my previous searches, a small address book with numbers and names I didn't recognize. Most of the entries were in Miranda's careful handwriting, but a few had been added recently in different ink. One name caught my attention, E. Voss Legal, followed by a phone number. I Googled the name and found Ethan Voss, attorney at law, with an office downtown. The photo on his website showed the same man I'd seen visiting apartment 2B. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. Miranda had been in contact with a lawyer I'd never heard of, a lawyer who was now visiting the woman who looked exactly like my wife, the one I believed I had lost. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in my chair, staring at Miranda's lake painting. For the first time since the service held in her memory, I let myself think the unthinkable. What if Miranda wasn't gone at all? What if everything, the illness, the hospital stay, the official paperwork, the farewell ceremony, had been an elaborate deception? But that would mean the woman I'd loved and trusted for 34 years was capable of a deception so profound, so cruel, that it challenged everything I thought I knew about her. It would mean she'd let me grieve for her while she started a new life 20 minutes from our home. It would mean our entire marriage had been a lie. I finished the bourbon and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call Celine Grady and ask for her help. Miranda's oldest friend, a retired paralegal who knew how to research legal documents and ask the right questions. If Miranda was alive, if this was all some elaborate fraud, I was going to prove it. And then I was going to find out why. You want me to what? Celine Grady stared at me across the table at the downtown library, her coffee growing cold between her hands. Help me investigate. You know how to research legal documents, how to trace financial records. If Miranda is alive, there will be a paper trail. Selena was 61, silver-haired, and sharp as a blade after 30 years as a paralegal. She'd been Miranda's friend since college, the maid of honor at our wedding, and Zoe's honorary aunt. If anyone would help me find the truth, it would be Celine. Clarence, I've known you for 35 years. You're the most rational, level-headed man I've ever met. That's why this scares me. Because you think I'm losing my mind. Because I think you're not. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday, about the scar and the mannerisms, and I remembered something. My heart rate picked up. What? The funeral. Something bothered me about the viewing, but I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Miranda's hands were positioned wrong. What do you mean? Her wedding ring was on her right hand instead of her left. I noticed it, but thought maybe the funeral director had made a mistake. But now... She trailed off. Now you're wondering if it wasn't Miranda in the casket. I'm wondering if we need to be certain, Celine said, pulling out a legal pad. If you're right, if Miranda somehow staged her disappearance, it would have required extensive planning and paperwork, altered medical records, an invalid official certificate, and cooperation from someone at the hospital. And a lawyer to coordinate everything? Tell me about this Ethan Voss. I showed her the address book entry and the website photo. Celine studied the image carefully. I'll run a background check on him, see what kind of law he practices. If he's involved in this, there might be other cases, other clients who've done similar things. We spent the next 2 hours developing a plan. Celine would research the legal aspects while I continued observing Miranda's routine. We'd meet again in 3 days to compare notes. Clarence, Celine said as we prepared to leave, if we're right about this, if Miranda is alive and living under a false identity, the implications are staggering. Insurance fraud, pension fraud, falsifying legal documents. We're talking about serious federal crimes. I know. And if we're wrong, if you're having some kind of breakdown and I help you harass an innocent woman, we could both face legal consequences? Are you backing out? Celine gathered her papers and stood. No, because 35 years ago, Miranda Fielding was my best friend. And if she's alive, I want to know why she put us through hell. That afternoon, I drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town, following a hunch. If Miranda was living under an assumed identity, she'd need somewhere to keep her real documents, family photos, anything that connected her to her former life. I parked across from the entrance and waited. At 4:15, the silver Honda appeared. Miranda drove through the gate, using a key card to access the facility. I watched her park near Building C and disappear inside. 20 minutes later, she emerged carrying a small metal box. She locked the storage unit and drove away. I waited until she was gone, then drove into the facility and found the unit she'd visited. Number C47, secured with a heavy padlock. The rental office was closed, but I made note of the unit number and the facility's name. That evening, I called the storage company and spoke with a manager. I'm trying to locate a unit rented by my wife, I said. Miranda Fielding, or possibly M. Parker. She passed away recently, and I need to settle her affairs. I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I can't give out information about our renters without proper legal documentation. You'd need to provide official papers showing you're the executor of her estate. Of course, I'll gather those documents and come in tomorrow. But I wouldn't be bringing Miranda's official papers. Instead, I'd be asking Celine to find out who was paying for Unit C47 and how long they'd been renting it. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Stop digging or you'll regret it. The message was typed, printed on plain white paper. No signature, no identifying marks. But the threat was clear. Someone knew I was investigating Miranda's disappearance. Someone wanted me to stop. I drove straight to Celine's condo and showed her the note. "This changes everything," she said, examining the paper carefully. "If someone's threatening you, it means you're getting close to something they want to keep hidden. Or it means I'm harassing an innocent woman and her friends are trying to protect her." "No." Celine shook her head firmly. "An innocent woman would call the police or get a restraining order. She wouldn't send anonymous threats. This is the behavior of someone with something to hide." She handed me a folder thick with documents. I spent all night researching Ethan Voss. He's a legitimate attorney, but he specializes in something very interesting: identity protection for people in witness protection or domestic abuse situations. He helps people legally change their names, relocate, establish new financial identities. That's not illegal. No, but it would give him the skills and connections to help someone disappear on paper. And look at this. She pulled out a bank record. "I have a friend who works at First National. Miranda's pension fund has been sending monthly payments to an account under the name M. Parker for the past 6 months." My hands shook as I studied the document. $500 every month, deposited into an account that shouldn't exist. "There's more," Celine continued. "I checked the property records for Maple Grove Apartments. Unit 2B is leased by Ethan Voss's law firm, officially listed as Client Housing Assistance. The lease was signed 3 weeks before Miranda's reported passing. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed proof that the woman in apartment 2B was actually Miranda. Photos, recordings, something that would convince the police to reopen the case. "I'm going back tonight," I said, "with a camera this time. Clarence, be careful. If they're willing to send threatening notes, they might be willing to do more." That evening, I parked in a different location and waited with a digital camera equipped with a telephoto lens. At 7:30, Ethan Voss arrived in his BMW. This time, I was ready. I photographed him entering the building, then waited. At 8:15, he and Miranda emerged together and walked to his car. In the parking lot's overhead lighting, I got clear shots of both their faces. But as they drove away, I noticed another car trailing them, a dark sedan that had been parked at the far end of the lot. A sharp chill ran through me as I realized I might not be the only one keeping an eye on Miranda. Who else was interested in the woman who was supposed to be gone? And what did they want with her? I followed at a distance, staying far enough back to avoid detection. The 3-car convoy wound through downtown, finally stopping at an upscale restaurant called Meridian. I parked across the street and watched Ethan and Miranda enter the establishment. The dark sedan parked nearby, but its occupant didn't get out. I waited 2 hours, taking photos whenever possible. When Ethan and Miranda finally emerged, they seemed relaxed, laughing about something as they walked to his car. They looked like a couple on a date, not a lawyer and client conducting business. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Miranda wasn't just hiding from her old life, she was building a new one, with another man. I followed them back to Maple Grove Apartments and watched Ethan walk Miranda to her door. They kissed goodnight on the landing, a brief but unmistakably intimate gesture. My wife of 34 years, who I'd mourned for 6 months, was alive and involved with another man. I sat in my car for a long time after they'd gone inside, staring at the building where the woman I believed lost was living under a false identity. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and mourned had deceived me in the most profound way possible. But why? What had driven Miranda to such extreme measures? What was so wrong with our life together that vanishing seemed preferable to honesty? I thought about our last months together, searching for signs I'd missed. Miranda had been quieter than usual, spending more time on her computer, taking phone calls she'd claimed were from the school district about her retirement benefits. Now I wondered if those calls had been from Ethan Voss, planning her escape from our marriage. The dark sedan was still parked nearby, its occupant invisible behind tinted windows. I started my engine and drove home, checking my mirrors constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. At home, I uploaded the photos to my computer and studied them carefully. The images clearly showed Miranda's face, the distinctive scar on her hand, and her intimate interaction with Ethan Voss. But they also raised new questions. If Miranda had wanted to leave our marriage, why not ask for a divorce? Why go to the extreme of disappearing entirely? And who was in the dark sedan? I was beginning to realize that Miranda's deception might be far more complex and risky than I'd imagined. The next morning, I called Celine and arranged to meet her at the library again. It was time to take our evidence to the authorities, regardless of Officer Keene's earlier warnings. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Miranda and Ethan Voss were planning, because I had a feeling that whatever it wasn't over yet. "My God, Clarence, these photos are..." Celine stared at the images on my laptop screen, her face pale under the library's fluorescent lights. Proof that my wife staged her disappearance and is living with another man. This is Miranda. There's no question. She pointed to the clearest shot, taken as Miranda and Ethan left the restaurant. Same facial structure, same posture, same scar. But look at this. Celine zoomed in on Miranda's left hand. She's still wearing her wedding ring, on the correct finger this time. I hadn't noticed that detail, but she was right. The simple gold band I'd placed on Miranda's finger 34 years ago was clearly visible. Why would she keep wearing it if she's involved with Ethan Voss? Maybe it's part of her cover story, or maybe... Selina paused, studying the image more carefully. Maybe her relationship with Voss isn't romantic. Maybe it's purely business. That kiss didn't look like business. A peck on the cheek between friends. I've seen you greet neighbors with more passion. Celine closed the laptop. We need to dig deeper before we jump to conclusions. She was right, but the possibility that Miranda was romantically involved with another man added a personal sting to the betrayal that made it hard to think clearly. I contacted my friend at the bank again, Celine continued. The M. Parker account was opened 3 months before Miranda was believed to be gone. The initial deposit was $50,000 in cash. $50,000? Where would Miranda get that kind of money? That's what we need to find out. I also ran a credit check on Emsa Parker. She has a driver's license, a credit card, even a library card. This isn't just an alias, it's a complete identity. We spent the morning researching identity fraud and the legal requirements for obtaining false documents. The process was complex and expensive, requiring connections in multiple government agencies. This isn't something Miranda could have done alone, Selene concluded. She would have needed professional help, someone with experience in creating new identities. Ethan Voss. Probably, but why? What was Miranda running from that required such extreme measures? I thought about that question as we left the library. Miranda had seemed happy in our marriage, involved in her work, close to Zoe. If she'd wanted a divorce, I would have been hurt, but not vindictive. We could have worked out a fair settlement, unless there was something else, something I didn't know about. That afternoon, I drove to Mercy General Hospital and requested to speak with someone about Miranda's medical records. The administrator, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, led me to a small office. Mr. Fielding, I understand you have questions about your wife's treatment here. I want to see her medical records, the complete file. Sir, I've already provided copies of everything to your attorney for the insurance claims. I didn't send an attorney. I haven't filed any insurance claims. Mrs. Patterson frowned and pulled up Miranda's file on her computer. According to our records, Ethan Voss from Voss Legal Services requested copies of all medical records on March 18th. He presented proper documentation showing he was representing the estate. 3 days after Miranda's memorial, Ethan Voss had obtained her complete medical file. Why would he need those records unless he was covering up something about her supposed passing? Mrs. Patterson, I need to see Dr. Richardson's notes about my wife's final days. I'm sorry, but I can't provide duplicate records without proper authorization. You'll need to contact Mr. Voss. I left the hospital more convinced than ever that Miranda and Ethan had orchestrated an elaborate fraud, but I still needed to understand their endgame. That evening, I returned to Maple Grove Apartments with a different strategy. Instead of watching from my car, I approached the building's property manager, a heavy-set man named Hector Munoz, who was replacing a broken light fixture in the parking lot. Excuse me, I said. I'm looking for my niece. She told me she lived here, but I can't remember her apartment number. Mary Parker? Hector looked up from his work. Miss Parker in 2B? Nice lady. Very quiet. Pays her rent early every month. That sounds like Mary. Has she lived here long? About 6 months. Moved in right after her husband passed, poor thing. Said she needed a fresh start. My chest tightened. Miranda was telling people she was a widow, using our marriage as a cover story for her new life. She seems to have a gentleman friend who visits regularly, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Mr. Voss? He's her lawyer. Helps her with the estate paperwork. Very professional man. Hector finished installing the new bulb and climbed down from his ladder. You know, Miss Parker looks just like this woman whose picture was in the newspaper a few months back. Missing person or something? Spitting image. Really? Yeah, but Miss Parker's got all her paperwork in order. References from her previous landlord, everything. Sometimes people just look alike, you know? I thanked Hector and walked back to my car, processing what I'd learned. Miranda was using a carefully constructed cover story, complete with forged references and documentation. The level of planning involved suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd been planning to leave our marriage for months, maybe longer. The next morning, I called Zoe and asked if she could meet me for coffee. I needed to know whether Miranda had said or done anything unusual in the weeks before she was believed to be gone. "Dad, you're scaring me," Zoe said as we sat in our usual corner booth at Cafe Luna. "You've been acting strange since Sunday. What's going on?" I studied my daughter's face, seeing so much of Miranda reflected there. How could I tell her that her mother might still be alive without shattering her? "I'm trying to understand your mother's state of mind before everything happened," I said carefully. Whether there were signs I overlooked. "You mean like depression?" "I don't think Mom was depressed, Dad. Distracted maybe, but not depressed." "Distracted how?" "She spent a lot of time on her computer, researching something. When I asked, she said it was retirement planning, maybe travel after she stopped working." Zoe stirred her latte absently. She also got a lot of phone calls near the end. She always stepped outside to take them. "Did she ever say who was calling?" "Insurance people," she said, something about her pension. Zoe looked at me closely. "Dad, why are you asking all this? Is there a problem with Mom's insurance?" "No, sweetheart. I'm just trying to put the pieces together." But I was lying to my daughter, just as Miranda had lied to all of us. The realization turned my stomach. That afternoon, I drove to the storage facility and spoke with the manager again, this time bringing the official certificate and my identification as executor of Miranda's estate. "I need access to any units rented by my wife, Miranda Fielding, or under the name M. Parker." The manager, a young man with multiple piercings, checked his computer. "I see a unit rented to Monsieur Parker, but the account is active and paid through the end of the year. I can't grant access without a court order." "Even with this documentation?" "Sir, the renter of that unit is not listed as deceased. She was here just yesterday." Another confirmation that Miranda was alive and actively maintaining her false identity. It also meant I couldn't see what she was hiding without legal action. I called Selene from the parking lot and explained everything. "We need to go to the police," she said. "We have enough to reopen the case." Officer Keene warned me about harassment charges. That was before we had proof. Photos, financial records, witness accounts. This isn't the imagination of a grieving husband anymore. This is documented fraud. That evening, I organized everything into a single detailed file. Photos of Miranda, bank records showing pension payments, evidence of Ethan Voss's involvement, statements from Hector Munoz and the hospital administrator. But as I worked, I kept thinking about the dark sedan I'd seen trailing Miranda and Ethan. If they were involved in deception, they may have crossed others too. People who wanted exposure, or worse, people who wanted a share. I was starting to understand that Miranda's staged disappearance might only be the opening move in something far larger. The next morning, I would take everything to the authorities and demand they reopen her case. But first, I wanted one last look at the woman who had unraveled my life with her lies. I drove to Maple Grove Apartments and parked in my usual spot. At 8:30, Miranda emerged from her apartment and walked to her car. But instead of driving away immediately, she sat in the Honda for several minutes, talking on her cell phone. Even from a distance, I could see she was agitated, gesturing emphatically as she spoke. When she finally hung up and drove away, she was moving fast, like someone running from trouble. I followed her through downtown traffic, staying back as she made several quick turns. She was checking her mirrors constantly, clearly worried about being followed. But she wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the dark sedan that had appeared again, trailing both of us through the city streets. Miranda pulled into a parking garage downtown, and I watched the sedan follow her inside. I waited 5 minutes, then drove into the garage myself. I found Miranda's Honda on the 3rd level, but there was no sign of the sedan or its occupant. Miranda was nowhere to be seen. As I walked back to my car, I noticed something on the Honda's windshield, a white envelope tucked under the wiper blade. I looked around to make sure I was alone, then grabbed the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Payment overdue, you have 48 hours. Whatever game Miranda and Ethan were playing, it was about to come to an end. And I had a feeling that when it did, the truth would be more shocking than anything I'd imagined. The envelope in my hands felt like evidence of something far more dangerous than insurance fraud. I photographed the note before returning it to Miranda's windshield, my mind racing through the implications. Miranda wasn't just hiding from her old life. She was running from someone in her new one. I waited in the parking garage for 20 minutes before Miranda returned, accompanied by Ethan Voss. They were walking quickly, their conversation intense and worried. Miranda grabbed the envelope from her windshield and tore it open, her face going pale as she read the contents. Ethan put his hand on her shoulder, speaking in low, urgent tones. Even from a distance, I could see the fear in Miranda's posture, the way she kept glancing around as if expecting trouble. They got into their respective cars and left the garage together. I followed at a distance, watching as they drove to Ethan's law office downtown. They disappeared inside, and I parked across the street to wait. At noon, I called Celine from my car. I think Miranda and Ethan are in some kind of trouble. Someone's threatening them, demanding payment for something. What kind of payment? I told her about the note and the mysterious sedan that kept following them. Clarence, this is getting dangerous. If Miranda's involved with people who make threats and follow cars, you need to stay away from her. Not until I understand what's happening. Our daughter deserves to know the truth about her mother. Our daughter deserves to have her father stay alive and out of jail. But I couldn't walk away, not when I was so close to answers. I'd spent 6 months grieving a lie, and I needed to know why. At 2 o'clock, Miranda and Ethan emerged from his office building. They looked calmer now, more composed. Whatever they'd discussed inside had given them a plan. I followed them to First National Bank, where they spent an hour inside before returning to their cars. As they drove away, I noticed the dark sedan was back, maintaining a careful distance behind them. 3 cars in a convoy, Miranda, Ethan, and their mysterious pursuer, with me trailing all of them through the afternoon traffic. We ended up back at Maple Grove Apartments. Miranda and Ethan went inside while the sedan parked in the visitor section. I positioned myself where I could watch both Miranda's apartment and the sedan. At 4 o'clock, my phone rang. Zoe's name appeared on the screen. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. My heart rate spiked. What is it, sweetheart? I got a postcard today. No return address, postmarked locally. It's just signed with the letter M. Her voice was shaky. Dad, the handwriting looks like Mom's. I closed my eyes, feeling the last piece of normalcy slip away from our lives. What does it say? Thinking of you. Hope you're well. That's all, but it's Mom's handwriting. I'm sure of it. Zoe, where are you right now? At my studio. Dad, what's going on? Is Mom alive? I looked up at apartment 2B, where Miranda was hiding from her old life while someone from her new life hunted her down. My daughter deserved the truth, but the truth was more complicated and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. I'm coming to get you. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. I drove to Zoe's art studio in the warehouse district, constantly checking my mirrors to make sure I wasn't being followed. Zoe was waiting outside, holding the postcard with trembling hands. Dad, tell me what's happening. I took her inside and showed her the photos on my phone. Clear images of Miranda at the farmer's market, outside the apartment building, with Ethan Voss at the restaurant. Zoe stared at the screen in shock, then sank into a chair. She's alive. Mom is alive, and she let us believe she was gone. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wanted to be sure before I told you. How long have you known? Since Sunday. I've been investigating, trying to understand why she would do this. Zoe looked at the photos again, tears streaming down her face. She looks happy. In these pictures, she looks happy. The pain in her voice was devastating. Zoe, there's more. I think your mother might be in some kind of trouble. Someone's been threatening her, following her around. That's why I needed to find you. What kind of trouble? I don't know yet, but until we figure this out, I want you to stay with me. Don't go back to your apartment alone. We drove to my house together, Zoe silent and stunned in the passenger seat. At home, I showed her all the evidence Celine and I had gathered, the financial records, the storage unit rental, the hospital records request. This is so elaborate, Zoe said, studying the timeline we'd constructed. She planned this for months. The question is why? What was she running from? Zoe was quiet for a long time, staring at a photo of Miranda from our last Christmas together. Dad, what if she wasn't running from something? What if she was running to something? What do you mean? What if this wasn't about escaping our family? What if it was about protecting us? I hadn't considered that possibility. What if Miranda's staged disappearance wasn't a betrayal, but a sacrifice? What if she'd become entangled in something dangerous and vanished to keep Zoe and me safe? The idea was almost more painful than the betrayal theory. If Miranda had been trying to protect us, she'd been facing some terrible threat alone. That evening, Celine came to the house to review our evidence and meet with Zoe. The 3 of us sat around the kitchen table, trying to piece together the puzzle of Miranda's disappearance. The $50,000 cash deposit bothers me, Celine said. That's not the kind of money a retired school librarian has lying around. Could it have been from selling something? Jewelry, investments? Zoe suggested. I've been through all our financial records. Nothing's missing from our accounts, no large withdrawals or sales. I pulled out Miranda's jewelry box and opened it. Everything's still here, including the expensive pieces. Celine examined the jewelry carefully. Wait, look at this. She held up Miranda's grandmother's diamond earrings, the ones Miranda had worn to every important event in our marriage. These are excellent fakes. What? The stones are cubic zirconia, not diamonds. The settings are gold-plated, not solid gold. Selene looked at me with concern. When did you last see Miranda wearing these? I thought back. Christmas dinner. She wore them to Zoe's apartment. And you're sure they were real then? They were real when I married her. They've been in our family for 3 generations. Zoe took the earrings and examined them under the kitchen light. Mom sold the real ones and had fakes made to replace them. She needed money for something and didn't want us to know. The revelation added another layer to Miranda's deception. She'd been liquidating assets in secret, converting family heirlooms into cash for her escape plan. There might be more, Selene said grimly. We should check everything. We spent 2 hours going through Miranda's belongings, finding more fake jewelry, discovering that several valuable items were missing entirely. By the time we finished, we'd identified at least $75,000 in stolen or replaced assets. She was planning this for a long time, Zoe said quietly. Months, maybe years. The next morning, I called Officer Keene and requested an immediate meeting. It was time to present our evidence and demand that Miranda's case be reopened as a fraud investigation. Mr. Fielding, this is substantial, Officer Keene said as she reviewed our files. You've documented what appears to be an elaborate identity fraud scheme. Will you reopen the case? I'll need to review this with my supervisor, but yes, I believe there's cause for a criminal investigation. She studied the photos of Miranda closely. If this woman is your wife, and she staged her disappearance while unlawfully collecting pension benefits, she has committed several offenses. What happens next? We'll need to verify her identity, probably through fingerprints or DNA. If she's who you think she is, we'll arrest her for fraud and conspiracy. Officer Keene paused. Mr. Fielding, are you prepared for the possibility that your wife will go to prison? I thought about Miranda living in that modest apartment, wearing fake jewelry, looking over her shoulder for mysterious pursuers. Whatever she'd done, whatever she'd gotten involved in, she was already living in a kind of prison. I just want the truth, I said. Then you'll have it. We'll move on this tomorrow morning. But as I left the police station, I wondered if the truth would bring the closure I'd been seeking or open up new wounds that would never heal. Miranda had 48 hours to pay someone for something. The police would move in tomorrow morning. Whatever was going to happen, it would all be over soon. At 6 o'clock Thursday morning, I sat in my car across from Maple Grove Apartments, waiting for the police to arrive. Officer Keene had called an hour earlier to confirm the operation. They would approach Miranda's apartment at 7 a.m. with a warrant for her arrest on charges of fraud and identity theft. I wanted to be there when it happened. After 6 months of grief and 3 weeks of investigation, I needed to see Miranda's face when her elaborate deception finally collapsed. At 6:50, 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, followed by an unmarked sedan. Officer Keene emerged from one of the cars and spotted me across the street. She walked over to my window. Mr. Fielding, you shouldn't be here. This is police business now. I need to see her. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. Sir, I understand, but please, I won't interfere. I just need to know. Officer Keene studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Stay in your car. Don't approach the building until we give you clearance. I watched as the officers positioned themselves around the apartment complex. At exactly 7 o'clock, Officer Keene and 2 other officers climbed the stairs to apartment 2B and knocked on the door. Police, open up. No response. They knocked again, louder this time. Miranda Fielding, we have a warrant for your arrest. Still nothing. Officer Keene nodded to one of the other officers, who produced a key, probably obtained from the property manager. They opened the door and disappeared inside. 5 minutes later, Officer Keene emerged and signaled to me. I crossed the street and met her in the parking lot. The apartment's empty, she said. Looks like she cleared out in a hurry. Left some furniture, but took all personal belongings. When? Hard to say. Could have been any time in the last 24 hours. I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Part of me had wanted this confrontation, but another part was glad to avoid the pain of seeing Miranda arrested. There's something else? Officer Keene continued. We found this on the kitchen counter. She handed me an envelope with my name written on it in Miranda's familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her careful script. Clarence, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth. I'm sorry for putting you and Zoe through the pain of believing I was gone. I'm sorry for all the lies and deception, but I want you to know that everything I did was to protect our family, 2 years ago, I witnessed something I shouldn't have seen, a crime involving people with enough power and money to make problems disappear. When they realized I could identify them, they made it clear that my silence was the only thing keeping you and Zoe safe. I tried to live with the fear, tried to pretend everything was normal. But they kept watching us, following us, making subtle threats. When they told me they would hurt you and Zoe to ensure my cooperation, I knew I had to disappear. Ethan Voss helped me create a new identity. He's a good man who helps people escape dangerous situations. The pension money was supposed to support me until I could establish myself somewhere far away, but they found me anyway. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. The farther I am from you and Zoe, the safer you'll be. I love you both more than you'll ever know. Live your lives, be happy, forget about me. Miranda. I read the letter twice, my hands shaking. Miranda hadn't betrayed us. She'd sacrificed herself to protect us. Mr. Fielding, are you all right? I looked up at Officer Keene, who was watching me with concern. She was protecting us. Someone was threatening our family, and she staged her disappearance to keep us safe. What kind of threats? I handed her the letter. As she read it, her expression grew more serious. Mr. Fielding, if your wife witnessed a serious crime and was being threatened because of it, this changes everything. We're not dealing with simple fraud anymore. What do you mean? I mean, we need to find out who was threatening her and why. If she's still in danger, if you and your daughter are still in danger, we need to know about it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. If Miranda was right, if she'd been protecting us by disappearing, then my investigation might have put us all at risk. The dark sedan, I said suddenly. Someone's been following Miranda and Ethan Voss. I saw them multiple times. Can you describe the vehicle? I gave Officer Keene everything I could remember about the sedan and its mysterious occupant. She took detailed notes and promised to follow up on the threats mentioned in Miranda's letter. In the meantime, I want you and your daughter to be very careful. Vary your routines, stay in public places, call us if you notice anything suspicious. I drove home with Miranda's letter in my pocket, my mind reeling from the revelation. Everything I'd thought about her disappearance was wrong. The woman I'd loved for 34 years hadn't abandoned us. She'd made the ultimate sacrifice to keep us safe. At home, I called Zoe and asked her to come over immediately. When she arrived, I showed her Miranda's letter. Zoe read it in silence, tears streaming down her face. She was trying to protect us, she whispered. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I thought she had betrayed us, but she was trying to save us. What crime did she witness? What was she so afraid of? I don't know, but the police are going to investigate. We spent the morning going through Miranda's belongings again, this time looking for clues about what she might have seen or who might have threatened her. In her desk, we found a folder labeled School District Retirement Planning that we'd overlooked before. Inside were documents related to a construction project at the library where Miranda had worked, a major renovation funded by a city grant. But there were also handwritten notes in Miranda's writing, documenting irregularities in the bidding process and what appeared to be evidence of corruption. Look at this, Zoe said, pointing to one of Miranda's notes. She documented meetings between city officials and contractors where money changed hands under the table. She was building a case against them, and they found out about it. The pieces were finally falling into place. Miranda had uncovered corruption in a city construction project and documented evidence of bribery and fraud. When the people involved realized she could expose them, they'd threatened our family to ensure her silence. But Miranda had been too honest to live with corruption and too loving to risk our safety. So she'd chosen a third option, disappearing from her own life to protect the people she loved. I called Officer Keene and told her about the construction documents. Mr. Fielding, this is exactly the kind of case that generates serious threats. If your wife had evidence of municipal corruption involving significant money, the people responsible would do anything to stop her from talking. Are we still in danger? I don't know, but I'm going to assign patrol cars to watch your house and your daughter's apartment until we figure out who was threatening your wife. That afternoon, Celine came to the house to hear about the morning's developments. When I showed her Miranda's letter, she broke down and cried. I should have known, she said. Miranda would never have abandoned her family without a compelling reason. None of us knew. She was too good at protecting us. What happens now? The police investigate the corruption case. We try to figure out if we're still in danger, and we hope Miranda is somewhere safe. But even as I said it, I wondered if Miranda would ever truly be safe. The people who had pushed her to disappear were still out there, still powerful enough to threaten anyone who crossed them. That evening, as I sat in my chair looking at Miranda's painting of the lake, I realized our story wasn't finished. Miranda was still somewhere out there, still moving forward, still watching over us from afar. The woman I believed I had lost was very much alive, and the woman I once thought had betrayed us had, in truth, protected us. But the people who had driven her away were still free, still dangerous, and still capable of destroying anyone who threatened their secrets. For the first time in months, I had hope that I might see Miranda again, but I also had a new fear, that the next time we met, it might be at another funeral. This time, it might be real. 3 days later, Officer Keene called with news that would change everything one final time. Mr. Fielding, we've made arrests in the municipal corruption case. 5 city officials and 3 contractors are in custody. The evidence your wife gathered was enough to break the whole conspiracy. What about Miranda? Is she safe now? We're working on that. But there's something else you need to know. We found Ethan Voss. My heart rate spiked. Where? County morgue. He was found in his car yesterday morning, an apparent self-inflicted act. But there was a note. Officer Keene read from the report. Mr. Voss wrote that he couldn't live with what he'd done, that he'd been assisting criminals who were threatening innocent people. He provided details about the corruption scheme and confirmed that your wife was forced to disappear to protect your family. So it's over? The immediate danger is over, yes. But Mr. Fielding, your wife is still officially listed as gone. She's still living under another identity. Even if no charges are pursued, reclaiming her real life will require a long and complicated legal process. Will you help her with that? If we can locate her, yes, but she's been extremely careful to remain hidden. I ended the call and phoned Zoe with the news. The people who had threatened our family were in custody. The corruption network had been exposed. Miranda could come back. But would she? After 6 months of living as someone else, after the strain of staging her own disappearance, would Miranda be able to return to the life she had left behind? That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter of my own. Miranda, if you're reading this, then you know the threat is over. The people who forced you to disappear are in custody. You're safe now. We're all safe. I know you sacrificed everything to protect Zoe and me. I know you made the hardest choice anyone could make, giving up your own life to save ours. But now I'm asking you to make another choice. Come home. Let us help you reclaim your identity, your life, your place in our family. We love you. We miss you. And we understand why you had to leave, but you don't have to stay gone. Your husband, Clarence. I mailed the letter to Monsieur Parker at a dozen different post office boxes around the city, hoping one would reach her. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was shopping at the farmer's market when I heard that laugh again. I turned, and there she was. Not hiding this time, not running, but standing in the sunshine buying tomatoes from the same vendor where this whole journey had started. She saw me watching her and smiled, the same smile that had captured my heart 35 years ago. Hello, Clarence, Miranda said, walking toward me with tears in her eyes. I got your letter. I dropped my shopping bag and took her in my arms, holding her tight against my chest, feeling her heartbeat against mine. Welcome home, I whispered. And for the first time in 6 months, our family was whole again.